YouTube, what's going on? It's Juan Gotti here with yet another Washington football team video, and in today's video, I'm coming on here to talk about some players that I believe needs to have a good training camp in order to make the 2021 roster. So without further ado, let's get straight into today's video. But before we do, make sure you guys go down below, leave a like on this video, subscribe if you're new, and turn on post notifications so you get notified when I upload a video about the NFL, or in this case, our Washington football team. We're so close to 3,000 subscribers. I know we can get there in no time if you guys support. So hit that big red subscribe button if you haven't already. Let's get straight into today's video. So when I say players that needs to have a good training camp in order to make the roster, the players on my list are players that I believe are going, have a good chance of making this roster. All they need is to have a good training camp, and they're going to be on the roster in my opinion. So if I don't name some of those players, yeah, they need a good training camp, but I personally don't think they're going to make the roster. So if you don't hear me say their name 9 times out of 10, I don't think they're going to make the roster, or unless I just miss a couple. But more than likely, I feel like they're not going to make the roster if I don't say their name. So we're kicking off my list with a bunch of wide receivers. The first person on my list who I believe needs to have a good training camp in order to make this roster is wide receiver Kelvin Harman. And Kelvin Harman, man, it was just unlucky for him because not only did we get a new coaching staff, so he was going to obviously have to prove himself to the new coaching staff, but in the mix of training for the 2020 training camp, he got hurt. He tore his ACL, as we all knew, and it was unfortunate because I thought, Kelvin Harman could have been the second option alongside Terry McLaurin. He was coming off a solid 2019 campaign where he tore it up down the stretch of the season, and I really had high hopes for Kelvin Harman. He had a lot of untapped potential, and he still has a lot of potential, but obviously with him tearing his ACL, it set him back a year. And like I said, it's unfortunate because not only did he get hurt, but he had to prove himself to a new coaching staff, and he didn't get that chance to. So now he has to have a phenomenal training camp in order to make this roster, in my opinion, because Ron Rivera did not draft this guy. They don't know nothing about Kelvin Harman really outside of the 2019 tape, and other than that, they really don't know this guy, so they don't owe him no loyalty. They can easily just cut him. Not to mention that this wide receiver room obviously got a big upgrade this offseason with the addition of Curtis Samuel, De'Ami Brown, just to name a few. So he's on the outside looking in, and it's not his fault. It's unfortunate because injuries are a part of the game, but it just happened at the wrong moment for Kelvin Harman. So I believe he needs to have a phenomenal training camp in order to make this roster in 2021. This guy on my list is Gandy-Golden, and the reason why I believe he needs to have a big training camp in order to make this roster is because, once again, our wide receiver room has had a big overhaul, so he's on the outside looking in. Injuries riddled his rookie year last year, and I just feel like now with us having a whole bunch of good receivers, it's not that he's not talented enough to play on this team, but he's just in the back because he really didn't get to show what he could do. And last year when he did get to show what he can do, he looked lost out there. I know you guys remember that Panthers game. He just didn't look comfortable. And I mean, understand he's a rookie and whatnot, and I personally had him as a lock on making my six-man wide receiver room for the 2021 roster, 53-man roster. But like I always say also is I would not be surprised if he does get cut, because once again, this wide receiver room is way better than what it was when he got drafted. But the reason why I believe he's more safe than Kelvin Harman is because he was drafted by Ron Rivera. I do think that another guy could take his spot that is going to outwork him in training camp. So this guy needs to have a phenomenal training camp. Kelvin Harman and AGG are really essentially fighting for that 5th or 6th spot along with Cam Sims. So I really do think that AGG needs to have a phenomenal training camp in order to make this roster, or even with him being a Ron Rivera guy, you could see him getting cut or sent down to the practice squad. So next player on my list is another wide receiver. Just spoke of him, Cam Sims, and I know a lot of people are going to be surprised by this because Cam Sims has had a solid year in the 2020 year, and that's true. You know what I'm saying? Cam Sims shocked a lot of us, but I do think with us, and I'll continue to say this throughout the video, with us upgrading the wide receiver room mightily this offseason, he's going to have to prove himself yet again. And I know this is no surprise to Cam Sims because he's been having to prove himself all year, or all since he's been in the NFL, really. And Cam Sims, like I said, he balled out last year, but he did have some woes. I know you guys remember corner. Remember multiple games where he dropped some passes that really cost us. The Tampa Bay game, playoff game, really was the one that takes the cake. But other than that, he had other games. I believe in the Pittsburgh game he had a few drops. I know in the Pittsburgh game he's also had some great completions and some big plays, such as the screenplay, such as the one-handed grab to set up the or to keep the drive alive. So I know he made some big plays, but he's also had some big drops, and that's the biggest problem with Cam Sims. Is if he can stay consistent, he'll definitely be a lock on this roster, or at least in this wide receiver room. But since he's not consistent, or at least shown that he can't be consistent as of right now, that's the reason why he's not a lock in my opinion, and that's the biggest question mark. So if this guy could have a phenomenal training camp, which he seems like he does every year, so that should be easy for Cam Sims. But if he can also show in the preseason, this up and coming, that he can be consistent, a consistent open target for whoever the quarterback's going to be, and he's going to corral the ball and make the catch, and obviously keep his legs turning and going downfield, he can make this roster with no question. But the consistency is the biggest problem with Cam Sims. I think Cam Sims is the most safest out of this whole group, but at the same time, he does still have a lot to prove, and the biggest thing that he needs to work on is just consistency. And if he does that, he's going to be a lock on this team for sure. Next player that I need to talk about, who I feel like it needs a big training camp to make this roster, is Sadiq Charles. And I know another guy who was from the 2020 draft class who's really haven't got to prove himself because of injury, just like Antonio Gandy-Golden. But with us, just like the wide receiver room, with us upgrading the offensive line, especially the position that is looking like he's going to play, he needs to prove himself if he wants to make this roster, because he has a lot of guys in front of him. He has Wes Schweitzer, he has Eric Flowers, just to name a few, and not to mention we have Keith Ishmael, who can also play guard too. So he has a bunch of guys that's in front of him that is assuming to play guard. And like I said, Sadiq Charles could be the tackle, the position that we drafted him to play, but it's not looking like it. It's looking more like Charles Leno and Cornelius Lucas jobs to lose. But like I said, you never know until you get out there in training camp. But it's looking more like Sadiq Charles is going to be a guard, so he needs to have a big training camp, just because we upgraded that position specifically so mightily this offseason. And honestly, if Sadiq Charles can have a big training camp, or at least show some improvement, Sadiq Charles needs a big training camp. But if he can show that he can stay healthy for the whole preseason, and at least to start off the year, if he gets some snaps and he can stay healthy throughout training camp too, he is going to make this roster. Sadiq Charles, the talent is never the question, but it's just health concerns. You remember he came into the Giants game for one play, and then he got hurt for the rest of the year, and we didn't see him no more after that. So if he can just stay healthy throughout training camp, throughout the preseason, throughout the regular season, if he gets a lot of burn, he's going to be essentially the starting guard, maybe for the future, or maybe even starting tackle. We never know, because that's the position that he got drafted at. But once again, I believe Sadiq Charles needs to have a big training camp, and not only that, he needs to stay healthy. Player on my list is Samus Reyes, and I threw Samus Reyes on this list only because I feel like he's a developmental player, and if he can have a big training camp, he's going to make this roster for sure. But now looking back on it, I do think he's going to make this roster regardless. I don't think he needs a huge training camp like some of these other guys, but I do think he needs to have a big training camp in some way to make this roster, because now we have Logan Thomas, John Bates, and Ricky Seals-Jones, so he can easily lose that third tight end spot, which we already assume that he has, because he still has a lot to learn, starting with the rules. He even said that he doesn't know all the rules, and also starting with the route running and just being a tight end overall. He still has a lot to learn, and I know a lot of people don't want to hear that because they want him to be out there week one, but it's not going to be likely. He needs to have a big training camp. He needs to show improvement, which the work ethic is there, as we've seen already from this guy, but he needs to have a big training camp and possibly a huge preseason to make this 53-man roster. So on my list is linebacker Khaleke Hudson. Khaleke Hudson needs to have a big training camp, in my opinion, is because I feel like he's going to eventually take over that weak side linebacker role from Jamin Davis when Jamin Davis moves over to middle linebacker, or at least I assume that Jamin Davis is going to play weak side week one, and then John Bosch is going to be in the middle. But then I believe eventually this season, Jamin Davis is going to move to middle linebacker, and then we're going to slide in Khaleke Hudson weak side. So I believe Khaleke needs to have a big training training camp in order to show them that he has the ability to play at that position. And he already showed them in one game versus Seattle where he had, I believe, 15 tackles. But still, one game isn't enough. So he needs to have a big training camp, a big preseason to show these guys, yeah, I'm ready to ball out. I'm ready to be a starter on this team. And I believe Khaleke Hudson could do it. He put on some pounds. He put on some weight this offseason, some muscle, I should say. So I believe that's going to help him out mightily too. But if Khaleke Hudson wants to make this roster, and more importantly, he wants to be a contributor on this roster, not just special teams, he needs to show the coaching staff that he can do it in training camp. He can do it in preseason. So I believe Khaleke Hudson is going to eventually do that, in my opinion. Like I said, him and Cam Sims and Sadiq Charles are probably the most safest players on this list. Moving on to my last player, Landon Collins needs to have a big training camp, in my opinion. You guys already know how I feel about Landon Collins, but the reason why Landon Collins needs to have a big training camp is because he's coming off a torn Achilles. Not only is he coming off a torn Achilles, he has a lot of, competition now with Cam Curl, with Bobby McClain, with Derek Forrest, with a lot of other players, Jeremy Reeves, DeShazer Everett, and even you could throw in Troy Ackley there. So he has a lot of competition there. You can even throw in Kendall Fuller, who has the ability to play safety. And I know Landon specifically specifies in strong safety the position, but JDR and Chris Harris has already said we're all DBs. We classify as DBs. Nobody plays one specific position, so that's why I'm naming everyone else, even though they play a specific free or they play a specific strong. And even with Kendall Fuller, he plays mainly cornerback. They all have the ability to play all of these positions in the secondary, and I believe Landon Collins needs to have a big training camp in order to make this roster. I'll continue to say this, and it's true. The only reason why Landon Collins is still on this roster is because of his contract. His contract is saving him. He knows that if we cut him, it's going to be a detrimental to our cap. So we have to stick around with Landon Collins for at least this one more year, and then we could possibly cut him next year. But if Landon Collins wants to prove himself, he's going to have a huge training camp and a huge preseason, because I feel like he's on the outside looking in, and the only reason why he's still here is because of that contract. So yeah, man, it's been your boy Juan Gotti. Comment down below, who would you add to my list? Who do you think needs to have a big training camp in order to make our roster? Like, comment, subscribe. Help to watch the football team. We're so close to 3,000 subscribers. I know we can get there in no time if you got support. I'm out. Peace. Cross me one time, that's gonna get you popped.